Skyrim is filled with places players remember instantly. Major cities, iconic ruins, huge quest locations that become impossible to forget, no matter how many times you replay the game. But then there are other places. The ones hidden between mountains, buried deep in the wilderness, or tied to quests so small that most players never return after finding them once. Locations that feel like they're slowly faded into the background of Skyrim itself. And the strange thing is, some of these places are actually incredible. They have atmosphere, lore, unique designs, sometimes even entire stories attached to them. But for one reason or another, they're almost never talked about. They exist quietly at the edges of the game, overshadowed by bigger locations and forgotten over time. And that's exactly what makes them so interesting to go back and look at. Raven Rock is one of the strangest examples of a forgotten place in Skyrim, because technically it shouldn't be forgotten at all. It's the central settlement of the entire Dragonborn DLC, the first major location players arrive at when they reach Solstheim, and one of the most distinct towns Bethesda ever created for Skyrim. It has unique architecture, an entirely different atmosphere from mainland Skyrim, deep political and cultural tensions, and direct ties to some of the most important lore in the Elder Scrolls universe. On paper, Raven Rock should be one of the most memorable locations in the entire game. And yet somehow, once players leave the island behind, Raven Rock often fades from memory faster than almost any major settlement in Skyrim. That's what makes it such an interesting forgotten place, not because it lacks importance, but because it exists in a part of the game many players treat as temporary. The moment you arrive in Raven Rock, it immediately feels separate from Skyrim itself. The thick ash storms rolling through the streets, the dark stone buildings, the red mountain looming in the distance. It creates an atmosphere unlike anywhere else in the game. Even the sound design feels different. The wind carries ash instead of snow. The environment feels heavier, harsher, more oppressive than the open landscapes of Skyrim. And that uniqueness should make the town unforgettable, but in practice it often has the opposite effect. Because Raven Rock feels disconnected from the rest of the game in a way few other settlements do. The town exists physically within the Dragonborn DLC, but emotionally it feels almost detached from Skyrim's core experience. Most players arrive there with a specific purpose: follow the cultists, investigate Mirak, complete the expansion storyline. Raven Rock becomes a hub for progression rather than a place players naturally settle into over time. And once that progression ends, there's very little reason to return regularly. That temporary relationship within the town is a huge part of why it becomes forgotten. Compare it to cities like Whiterun or Solitude, which players revisit constantly throughout a playthrough. Those places become embedded into the rhythm of the game. Raven Rock never fully achieves that because Solstheim itself feels separated from Skyrim's normal flow. Travel there feels intentional, deliberate, almost isolated. And because of that, the town starts to feel like a memory from a different game entirely once the DLC is complete. The structure of Raven Rock reinforces this separation constantly. Unlike the sprawling cities of Skyrim, Raven Rock is compact and enclosed, surrounded by ash-covered walls and harsh terrain that make it feel trapped between survival and collapse. There's a constant sense that the settlement is struggling to endure rather than grow. That struggle defines the atmosphere of the town more than anything else. The Dunmer living there aren't thriving, they're surviving. Many NPCs speak openly about hardship, limited resources, and the difficulty of maintaining life on Solstheim. The town itself reflects this in its design. Buildings feel practical rather than grand, worn down by ash and time, shaped entirely around necessity. And that creates a very different emotional tone compared to Skyrim's mainland cities. Raven Rock feels tired, not ruined, not abandoned, just exhausted. That exhaustion becomes more noticeable the longer you stay there. Even after major quest lines are completed, The town never truly changes. The ash storms continue, the tension remains, the environment stays harsh and oppressive. Unlike cities in Skyrim that feel dynamic due to the political conflict or faction activity, Raven Rock feels static in its hardship. And strangely, that makes it easier to forget over time, because the town doesn't evolve dramatically, it persists quietly. That persistence is one of the most underrated aspects of Raven Rock's atmosphere. The settlement carries a constant feeling of endurance against impossible conditions. Solstheim itself is hostile, scarred by Red Mountain's eruption, and shaped by ash, snow, and isolation. Raven Rock exists within that environment almost stubbornly, refusing to disappear despite everything working against it. But because that endurance is subtle rather than dramatic, it rarely stays at the front of players' minds. The NPCs contribute heavily to this feeling. Characters like Councillor Morvain, Glover Mallory, and Cressius Carelius all reinforce the sense that Raven Rock is a place caught between survival and decline. There's history everywhere in the town, stories of mining struggles, political tension, family legacies, and Morrowind's collapse. But most of it unfolds quietly through dialogue rather than spectacle. And that quietness matters, because Skyrim players often remember locations through major events, battles, twists, large quest lines. Raven Rock's strength comes from atmosphere and slow world building, which ironically makes it easier for players to overlook once they leave. Even the visual design contributes to this forgotten quality. Raven Rock is visually stunning, but in a muted way. The ash-covered environment lacks the bright contrast or iconic landmarks that define places like Whiterun or Blackreach. Everything blends into shades of grey, black, and deep red. The town doesn't visually demand attention, it absorbs it into the surrounding landscape. That blending effect makes the settlement feel almost swallowed by Solstheim itself, like the island is slowly reclaiming it. And that creates another reason why Raven Rock becomes forgotten. It feels temporary even when it isn't. The town constantly gives the impression that it's barely holding together, that eventually the ash and isolation will consume it completely. That fragility lingers beneath everything. Even after Miraak is defeated and the major threats are resolved, Raven Rock never feels victorious. There's no sense of triumph or renewal. The town simply continues existing under the same harsh conditions it always has. That lack of resolution separates it from many other major locations in Skyrim. Most settlements eventually feel stable, secure, or at least hopeful after major quest lines conclude. Raven Rock doesn't. It remains burdened by its environment and history, no matter what you accomplish there. And because of that, it starts to feel emotionally distant from the player over time. Not important, just disconnected. The geography of Solstheim amplifies this even further. Raven Rock sits at the southern edge of the island, separated from mainland Skyrim by the Sea of Ghosts and surrounded by terrain that constantly reminds you how far from home you actually are. Travelling there requires intention. You don't casually wander into Raven Rock the way you might revisit Whiterun or Riften during normal exploration. You choose to go back, and most players simply don't. Not because the town is bad, but because Skyrim's main world naturally pulls attention elsewhere. That's what makes Raven Rock such a fascinating forgotten place. It's not hidden, abandoned, or insignificant. In many ways, it's one of the richest locations Bethesda ever designed for Skyrim. But its separation from the main game, combined with its quiet storytelling and oppressive atmosphere, causes it to slowly fade from players' attention once Solstheim is left behind. And when you finally do return to Raven Rock after a long time away, the feeling is immediate. The ash storms, the silence, the heavy atmosphere pressing down over the town, it all comes back instantly. And suddenly you realise how strange it is that a place this unique becomes so easy to forget. Because Raven Rock doesn't lack identity. If anything, it has too much of it. It feels so detached from Skyrim's normal tone that it almost exists in its own category entirely. A settlement shaped by survival, isolation, and exhaustion, rather than adventure or conquest. And that difference is exactly why it slips from memory so easily once the DLC ends. Not because players didn't enjoy it, but because Raven Rock feels like somewhere you visit briefly before returning to the real Skyrim. Even though in many ways it's one of the most fully realised places in the entire game. That's what makes it one of the most forgotten places in Skyrim, a town filled with atmosphere, history and incredible world building, quietly buried beneath ash and distance, while the rest of the game moves on without it. Reekling Island is one of the easiest places in Skyrim to completely forget exists, and honestly, that's part of what makes it so fascinating. Hidden away off the northern coast of Solstheim, separated from almost everything else by freezing water and distance, the island feels less like a major location and more like something accidentally left behind at the edge of the map. Most players only ever encounter it briefly, if they encounter it at all. And even then, it's usually remembered as a strange side area filled with odd little goblin-like creatures, riding boars rather than as an actual place with atmosphere or identity. But the more you look at Reekling Island and the other locations where Reeklings live, the stranger and more forgotten they begin to feel. Because Reeklings occupy a very unusual position in Skyrim's world. They aren't treated like a major faction, they aren't tied to huge quest lines, and despite being one of the most unique enemy groups in the Dragonborn DLC, they exist almost entirely on the fringes of the game world, tucked away into caves, ruins, icy coastlines, and isolated corners of Solstheim that many players barely spend time exploring. That marginal existence is what makes their locations feel so forgotten. Reekling Island itself immediately captures this feeling through isolation alone. Reaching it requires going deliberately out of your way, crossing freezing northern waters to arrive at a tiny landmass that feels completely disconnected from the rest of the island. There are no major roads leading to it, no large quests pushing you there naturally, and no major narrative significance attached to the location. It exists just quietly in the distance, and once you arrive, the atmosphere feels strange almost immediately. The island is small, cold and primitive, covered in crude structures and signs of Reekling occupation that feel improvised rather than permanent. Unlike human settlements in Skyrim, which usually show some sense of organisation or expansion, Reekling camps feel unstable, temporary, almost scavenged together from whatever materials were available. Bones, wood, animal remains, fragments of things stolen or repurposed. And that rough construction style gives every Reekling location a feeling of neglect, as though these places were never meant to last long in the first place. But at the same time, there's something strangely persistent about them. The Reeklings survive in environments that should be almost impossible to live in. Frozen coastlines, ruined Nordic structures, isolated caves buried beneath snow and ice. Places most people in Skyrim would avoid entirely become functioning homes for them. And because of that, their settlements often end up hidden in locations the player rarely visits. That hidden quality becomes even more obvious in places like Castle Cragstag Caverns and Bristleback Cave. These aren't major landmarks players constantly travel through. They're side locations buried within Solstheim's harsher regions, often overshadowed by larger questlines involving Miraak, Hermaeus Mora, or the Skarl. The Reeklings exist beneath all of that large lore, occupying the forgotten spaces left behind by more important stories. And strangely, that makes their presence feel more authentic, because the Reeklings don't seem concerned with significance. They simply just survive. That survival-focused existence gives their settlements a very different atmosphere from most places in Skyrim. Human settlements are usually built around trade, politics, or military defense. Falmer caves feel hostile and invasive. Dwemer ruins feel ancient and abandoned. Reekling settlements feel improvised, chaotic, almost animalistic at times. But within that chaos, there's still a strange sense of community and adaptation. You see signs of social structure, primitive defences, domesticated boars, and organised camps that suggest the Reeklings are far more capable than they initially appear. And yet Skyrim rarely treats them seriously. That's another reason their locations become so forgotten. Reeklings are often viewed as comic relief or minor enemies rather than as an actual culture surviving in one of the harshest environments in the game. Players remember them for their sounds, their strange behaviour, or the absurdity of seeing them charge into battle on boars. But very few stop to think about where they live. And when you actually spend time in those places, the atmosphere becomes unexpectedly melancholic. Because Reekling territory feels abandoned by the rest of the world. Not abandoned in the literal sense, but ignored. These are communities existing entirely outside the attention of Skyrim's larger factions and narratives. The Empire doesn't care about them, the Nords barely acknowledge them, even the Dunmar on Solstheim mostly treat them as nuances, rather than inhabitants with their own place in the world. And because of that, Reekling settlements feel disconnected from history itself. Like forgotten corners where life continued quietly while the rest of the world moved on. The geography of Solstheim reinforces this perfectly. So much of the island is harsh, isolated, and difficult to navigate that entire regions feel naturally hidden from attention. The northern coastlines, where many Reeklings reside, are especially empty, covered in snow and surrounded by freezing seas that make them feel cut off from everything else. There's very little traffic through these areas, very few reasons for most players to return repeatedly. And because of that, the settlements fade into memory quickly after the DLC ends. Even visually, Reekling camps tend to blend into the environment rather than stand apart from it. Their crude structures use natural materials and scavenge debris that often makes them feel like extensions of the landscape itself. Unlike Nordic ruins or Dwemer architecture, which immediately draws your attention, Reekling settlements feel almost hidden within the terrain. That concealment contributes heavily to their forgotten quality. You don't remember a massive landmark, you remember fragments. Snow-covered huts, bones sticking out from the ground. Tiny figures moving through the fog. The atmosphere surrounding these places also feel very different from most enemy locations in Skyrim. Falmer caves are oppressive. Bandit camps feel also aggressive. Vampire lairs feel threatening. Reekling settlements often feel strangely quiet, not peaceful, but isolated in a way that feels detached from the larger world. Even combat with them tends to feel chaotic rather than structured. Their attacks are disorganized, loud, and frantic, reflecting the improvised nature of their entire existence. But once the fighting stops, what remains is often silence and emptiness. A tiny settlement sitting alone in the snow, forgotten almost immediately after you leave. That's what makes Reekling Island such a perfect example of a forgotten place in Skyrim. It isn't memorable because of a huge quest or major lore reveal. It's memorable because it feels like the edge of the world, a place that exists quietly beyond the areas players normally care about. And the same applies to nearly every Reekling location across Solstheim. They occupy the margins, the leftover spaces, the regions too cold, remote, or insignificant for anyone else to claim. And because of that, their settlements carry a very different emotional tone than most places in Skyrim. They don't feel grand or important. They feel overlooked, surviving quietly at the edge of the map while everything else draws the player's attention elsewhere. That's why they become so easy to forget. Not because they lack atmosphere, not because they're poorly designed, but because Skyrim itself rarely pauses long enough to focus on them. The main stories move past them quickly, the larger factions ignore them, and once the player leaves Solstheim behind, the memory of those frozen little camps often disappears beneath everything else the game throws at you. Until eventually, Reekling Island and the settlements surrounding it begin to feel almost dreamlike in retrospect. Tiny forgotten communities buried beneath snow and distance, still surviving, still waiting, in parts of Skyrim most players never think to return to again. Skull Village is one of the strangest places in Skyrim, because despite everything surrounding it, the lore, the isolation, the history tied to Miraak and Hermaeus Mora, it somehow feels like a place where almost nothing actually happens. And that contrast is exactly what makes it stand out. On paper, Skull Village should feel important. It sits in one of the harshest regions in the entire game, home to a deeply spiritual group of people with unique beliefs, ancient traditions, and direct ties to some of the biggest events in the Dragonborn DLC. But when you actually spend time there, especially after completing the major quest lines connected to it, the village becomes eerily still. Not abandoned, not empty, just quiet in a way that feels almost unnatural compared to the rest of Skyrim. That feeling starts with the village's location. Skarl Village is isolated even by Solstheim standards, tucked away in the snowy northern region of the island, far from the ash-covered chaos surrounding Raven Rock. The journey there already feels disconnected from normal exploration routes. You push through snowstorms, frozen terrain, and long stretches of wilderness where almost nothing breaks the silence, except the wind and the occasional hostile creature. And then you arrive at the village itself, a small cluster of buildings surrounded by snow, separated from everything else by sheer distance alone. At first glance, it feels like there should be more here. The atmosphere suggests significance. The Skarl have a unique culture, a different worldview from most people in Skyrim, a long history tied to the land itself. But once the initial novelty fades, you begin to notice how static the village actually is. The NPCs rarely move beyond their routines. The conversations stay limited. The environment barely changes. And unlike major towns or settlements elsewhere in Skyrim, Skarl Village doesn't feel like it's constantly generating activity around itself. It feels preserved in a fixed state. That fixed quality is what creates the sensation that nothing actually happens here. Even during major events tied to Mirak's influence, the village feels strangely restrained. The mind-controlled villagers work endlessly at the Allmaker stones, should create chaos or tension, but instead it creates repetition. The same motions repeated over and over again, the same emptiness in their behaviour. It doesn't feel dynamic, it feels suspended, like the village has been trapped in a loop, which evidently it has. But once that storyline ends, the stillness only becomes more noticeable, because after all the build-up surrounding the Skarl, the village simply settles back into silence again. That's what makes it so unusual compared to other isolated settlements in Skyrim. Places like Morthal or Dawnstar may feel quiet, but there's always underlying tension even after you've finished the quests. Rumours, conflicts, strange events, or constant movement beneath the surface. Skarl Village lacks that ongoing energy. Once its primary quests are complete, there's very little left to disturb the routine of the place. It just exists, unchanged, and that lack of change becomes almost eerie over time. The layout of the village reinforces this constantly. It's small, compact, and incredibly straightforward. You can understand the entire settlement within minutes of arriving. There are no hidden districts, no large taverns full of rotating NPC interactions. No sense that life is unfolding beyond what you immediately see. Everything is exposed and visible. And because of that, the village starts to feel less like a living settlement and more like a preserved snapshot of one. Even the NPCs contribute to this atmosphere. The Skarl people speak calmly, deliberately, almost uniformly. Their conversations revolve around tradition, balance, and respect for the Allmaker. But there's very little variation beyond that. They rarely feel spontaneous or emotionally reactive compared to NPCs elsewhere in Skyrim. That consistency can feel peaceful at first, but over time it starts to feel rigid, predictable, like the village itself resists disruption. And that resistance creates an unusual kind of emptiness. Skyrim is normally defined by unpredictability. Random encounters happen constantly. Dragons attack, NPCs fight, argue, travel, or even die. The world feels active even when you aren't directly engaging with it. Skarl Village feels disconnected from that activity, almost sealed away from it. That separation becomes even more obvious when you compare it to places like Raven Rock. Raven Rock feels alive with tension. Political struggles, economic issues, ash storms, and constant movement make the settlement feel unstable but active. Skull Village sits at the opposite extreme. Its problems are either ancient or already resolved, leaving behind a place that feels suspended outside the normal rhythm of the game. Even the environment surrounding the village contributes to this sensation. Northern Solheim is vast, cold and quiet. Snow stretches endlessly across the landscape, broken only by distant mountains and sparse signs of life. There's very little traffic through the region, very few reasons for outsiders to visit regularly, and almost no sense of connection to the larger world. The village isn't just isolated geographically, it feels isolated narratively as well. Like the game itself only briefly turns its attention toward the skull before moving on entirely. And because of that, Skull Village begins to feel forgotten in a strange way. Not forgotten by lore, the skull remained culturally important, but forgotten by movement, progression, by the constant momentum that drives most of Skyrim forward. That lack of momentum is what defines the village more than anything else. Nothing evolves there, nothing expands, nothing truly changes. The village simply returns to its routines no matter what happens around it. Even the architecture reinforces this stillness. The wooden huts are practical, minimal, and weathered by the environment. There's no sign of growth or development, no construction, no adaptation to the changing world beyond the village borders. Everything feels permanent in a way that's almost unsettling. Not ruined, not dying, just static. And static places in Skyrim always stand out because the rest of the game constantly pushes movement and discovery. That's why Skull Village can feel strangely empty even when people are present. It lacks the unpredictability that makes most locations feel alive. You understand the rhythms of the village very quickly, and once you do, there's little left to surprise you. The routines repeat, the conversations repeat, the atmosphere remains almost exactly the same no matter when you return. Compared to other quiet places in Skyrim, Skull Village stands apart because its silence feels intentional rather than accidental. This isn't a forgotten ruin or an unfinished location. It's a fully realised settlement designed around stillness, tradition, and isolation. And ironically, that design is what makes it feel like one of the only places in Skyrim where nothing happens. Because in Skyrim, nothing happening is rare. The world constantly tries to interrupt itself with conflict, danger, or even discovery. Skull Village resists all of that. It absorbs events, settles back into routine, and remains almost unchanged afterward. That creates a strange emotional effect when you revisit it later in the game. You return expecting movement, expecting the world to have shifted somehow. But everything feels nearly identical to how you left it. The same snow, the same silence, the same routines, continuing endlessly beneath the northern sky. And after enough time, that stillness starts to feel less peaceful and more isolating. Because the village doesn't just feel disconnected from Skyrim, it feels disconnected from time itself. A place where life continues quietly in repetition while the rest of the world changes around it. Not because the village lacks lore or significance, but because despite everything surrounding it, despite all the history and atmosphere attached to it, the place itself ultimately settles into complete stillness. A quiet corner of the island where the world seems to pause. And keep pausing long after you leave it behind. For every dragonborn who storms fortresses, slays dragons, and bends the world to their will, there are those who walk beside them, silently, loyally, and often unnoticed. Skyrim's world is vast, and its followers are as varied as its mountains. Warriors, mages, thieves, housecarls, and mercenaries. Some are beloved, like Lydia, whose tired sighs and battle cries are etched into memories. Or others, like Serana, carry entire stories on their shoulders. But for every famous companion, there is another who fades into obscurity. Some followers exist on the edges of the map. Forgotten mercenaries, minor quest givers, nameless blades waiting in abandoned forts. They are relics of a world that moves on without them. They were placed into Skyrim not to matter, but to fill space. Placeholders of companionship in a world that rarely looks back. Among all of these, one stands out as the most forgotten. Not because they are broken, or unworthy or disliked, but because Skyrim itself never gave them a chance to matter. In a small farming village west of Whiterun, there lives a young man named Eric. His home, Roekstead, is peaceful and plain. A handful of houses, a few fields, and a quiet inn. Travellers rarely stop there. Nothing remarkable ever happens in Roekstead, except perhaps the dreams of one relentless farmer. Eric wants more than this life. He dreams of adventure, of slaying dragons, delving into tombs and seeing the world beyond his father's fields. He idolises the heroes who pass through Skyrim's roads, wondering what it would be like to stand among them. But his father is a man bound by fear and loss. A former soldier, he has seen the price of adventure and refuses to let his son pay it. So Eric stays in Roekstead, tending crops, watching the horizon, and imagining what could have been. The player meets him there, leaning against the inn wall, speaking of the life he wishes he could have. And with a few words, the Dragonborn can change his fate, convincing his father to let him go, and helping him become Eric the Slayer. But after that, the world just forgets him. Eric the Slayer is a bold name, one that promises legend, yet it carries a haunting irony. Once he becomes a follower, Eric takes on his new title proudly, shedding his farmer's garbs for armor and a sword. He speaks with determination, ready to face danger, ready to live the life he's dreamed of. But his transformation does feel incomplete. Not because of anything he does is wrong, but because Skyrim never gives him a chance to be what his name suggests. Eric the Slayer is one of Skyrim's few followers with a personal narrative. He has a beginning, a dream, a family, and a name earned through character, not combat. But the game doesn't follow through. He joins you, fights beside you, and that's it. No questline, no closure, no homecoming. He can join the Blades, but he still feels forgotten in the wide world of Skyrim's companions. He becomes lost in the endless rotation of Skyrim's followers. Just another sword arm, another line of dialogue fading into the background. His title, the Slayer, becomes a cruel joke. Not because he fails to live up to it, but because no one remembers to ask whether he ever did. Roekstead itself is part of Eric's curse. The town is one of Skyrim's most isolated locations, a farming settlement tucked away between the Reach and Whiterun Hold, far from major roads or trade routes. Players visit it once, maybe twice, and rarely return. That geography shapes Eric's fate. He begins his story in a place that few players ever think about. And when he leaves it, there's no reason to go back. His home doesn't grow or change. His father doesn't get new dialogue. The town doesn't evolve with his absence. Eric's journey, therefore, is frozen in time. His leaving means nothing to the world, not even to Roekstead itself. This is the tragedy of Skyrim's forgotten spaces. They are alive only when you look at them. Once you walk away, they return to silence. And in that silence, characters like Eric vanish completely. Some followers in Skyrim achieve a kind of immortality. Lydia is remembered for her weary sarcasm and her loyalty unto death. Serana is remembered for her story, her conflict, and her heart. Even minor companions like Fandel or Janasa have unique reputations in the community. But Eric, he exists in the liminal space between relevance and erasure. He's not a bad follower at all. His combat is competent, his voice lines charmingly naive, his personality endearing, but Skyrim doesn't give him a purpose beyond that. He has no quest to complete, no items to find, no emotions are to conclude. He is static, in a game that thrives on movement. When players dismiss him, he simply returns to Roekstead, resuming the life he once longed to live. It's as though the world itself refuses to believe he could do more. In a land filled with warriors and gods, Eric is simply ordinary, and in Skyrim, ordinary is the same as invisible. What makes Eric the Slayer truly fascinating isn't his strength or weakness, it's his humanity. Most followers in Skyrim are defined by extremes. They are deadly assassins, tragic mages, divine heroes, or legendary warriors. Eric, by contrast, is painfully human. He doubts himself, he talks about his father, he admits his fear. That vulnerability makes him one of the most realistic characters in the game, and perhaps the most relatable. Who hasn't wanted to escape a small town? Who hasn't dreamed of being more, only to find that the world doesn't notice? In Eric, Skyrim quietly hides a mirror. He represents every dream that never quite takes flight. And that's what makes his eventual obscurity so heartbreaking. Because when you forget Eric, as most players do, you're forgetting something more than a follower. You're forgetting the beating heart of a person who wanted to matter. If you return to Rorikstead after dismissing Eric, you find nothing has changed. His father greets you with the same words, the crops still grow, the innkeeper still cleans the same mugs. Time has basically stood still. But knowing Eric's journey, there's a subtle melancholy in that stillness. The fields are quieter without him. The air feels heavier. It's easy to imagine his father sitting at his table, wondering if his son is alive. It's easy to imagine Eric standing on a hill somewhere, staring back toward the village, wondering if he did eventually make a mistake. Rorikstead becomes more than just a dot on the map. It becomes a symbol of ambition stifled, of potential unfulfilled, of dreams that bloom and die quietly in the shadow of greater things. In that sense, Eric isn't just the most forgotten follower or the loneliest companion. He's the embodiment of Skyrim's forgotten lives. If you travel to Rorikstead at sunset, you can almost see him, a young man standing by the inn, sword in hand, gazing toward the horizon. You might have taken him with you once, you might have left him behind. Either way, his story remains unfinished. Eric the Slayer isn't a hero or legend. He's a whisper of what could have been, a dreamer trapped in a world that forgot how to dream. In the end, his tale reminds us that Skyrim's greatness doesn't just lie in dragons, shouts, or prophecies. It lies in the small, quiet people who dared to hope they could be something more. And in that sense, Eric will never truly be forgotten. Followers are the lifeblood of Skyrim's world. They make the frozen wilderness feel less lonely, lend a blade in battle, and remind the Dragonborn that even heroes need allies. From Lydia's stoic loyalty to Serana's tragic charm, followers in the Elder Scrolls Skyrim are more than simple companions. They're pieces of narrative identity scattered across the land. Yet, not all followers share in that attention. Some are adored by players, immortalized in memes, stories, and mods. Others, however, fade into obscurity, forgotten not because they lack worth, but because the game itself hides them away, burying their stories beneath the noise of dragons and destiny. Among these unsung names stands one of Skyrim's most tragic and overlooked characters, Rogi Notbeard, the Nord miner of Kynes Grove. He is a man defined by humility, loyalty, and quiet endurance. And for that very reason, almost no one remembers him. To find Rogi Notbeard, one must first find Kynes Grove, a small mining village just south of Windhelm, tucked between jagged cliffs and thick pine woods. It's the kind of place most players pass through once, perhaps on their way to fight the dragon during the Way of the Voice. The dragon's resurrection overshadows everything, even the people who live there. Rogi can be found in the Braidwood Inn, usually drinking or sharing stories with the locals. He's a miner by trade, though his family's history runs deep with adventure and pride. He tells the player that his ancestors were warriors and explorers, and that his family heirloom, a treasured ancestral shield, has been lost to time. That simple backstory becomes his defining feature, his personal quest. Rogi's ancestral shield sends a player to recover it from one of several possible Radiant dungeons. It's a small, unassuming favour, a far cry from the epic battles or Daedric bargains that define other quests. But that's the tragedy of Rogi Notbeard. His story is simple, human, and entirely overshadowed. Skyrim's world doesn't pause for men like him. Unlike Serana, Farkas, or Ayla, Rogi has no scripted battles, no grand introduction, and no unique combat dialogue. He doesn't tie into a faction or carry mortal weight. When his quest is complete, he becomes available as a follower, but few players even realise it. Part of the reason lies in his placement. Kynesgrove is small, with no quests leading the player to speak with its residents beyond brief encounters. Rogi himself is never essential to any main questline, unless you explore and talk to him by chance. You'll likely never even know he exists. And even if you do recruit him, his combat abilities are modest. He is a warrior, yes, but one of middling skill, without special perks or remarkable dialogue. In a world filled with vampires, mercenaries, and werewolves, a simple miner fades quickly into the background. But what makes Rogi truly forgotten isn't his statistics, it's his humanity. Skyrim's world celebrates grand heroics and dark magic. It rarely celebrates the ordinary man who wakes up, works, and drinks to forget how small his life has become. Rogi Notbeard embodies that ordinariness so perfectly that he vanishes into it. Kynesgrove itself, it is a settlement that exists in the margins. Not quite a village, not quite a ruin. Its people are miners eking out a living beneath the shadow of dragon-haunted mountains. Rogi represents the working class of Skyrim, the ones who dig, build, and survive while heroes chase prophecy. He is a reflection of the lives the Dragonborn passes without noticing. When you speak to him, there's a warmth in his tone, a rough honesty that contrasts sharply with the arrogance of nobles or mercenaries. He doesn't want power, he doesn't seek vengeance. All he wants is to reclaim his family's honour, symbolised in a shield lost long ago. That quest, modest as it seems, says everything about him. He doesn't dream of slaying dragons or ruling kingdoms. He dreams of remembering who his people were, and in doing so, he exposes one of Skyrim's quietest truths, that history forgets those who never sought to shape it. The tragedy of him isn't just narrative, it's mechanical. Skyrim's design ensures his obscurity. He has no unique voice actor. His quest lacks journal depth or branching choices. His follower mechanics are identical to countless others. He doesn't tie into Radiant events, doesn't attend gatherings, and doesn't appear in factional politics. And yet, the lack of distinction is the point. Rogi represents the countless Nords, miners, farmers, and soldiers who populate Skyrim's world but never make its history books. He is the statistical average given form. That's why most players never recruit him, not because he is unworthy, but because the game itself whispers that he isn't important. And in that silence, the player learns something profound about Skyrim's world. Importance is not the same as worth. Rogi's ancestral shield quest, though simple, is surprisingly vast when examined closely. He asks the Dragonborn to retrieve a piece of his family's past, lost in some forgotten dungeon. There's something deeply symbolic about this quest. A man buried in obscurity sends the player into another forgotten place to recover a relic of a forgotten line. Every step of that journey is an act of remembrance, one that only the player can complete. And yet, once the shield is recovered, the quest ends quietly. Rogi thanks you, offers his friendship, and if asked, will follow you into battle. There are no fanfares, no grand rewards, no future dialogue about his restored pride. It's hauntingly human in its smallness. In a world where every quest seems to serve destiny, this one serves only memory. And that, paradoxically, is what makes it unforgettable, even as most forget it exists. To understand Rogi's obscurity, one must contrast him with Skyrim's more famous followers. Lydia, the house carl of Whiterun, becomes iconic because she's scripted into the main quest. Serana from the Dawnguard DLC offers complex backstories and moral tension. Cicero, the mad jester, combines humour and darkness. Rogi, however, offers no drama. He is not a symbol of tragedy or power, merely of persistence. His strength lies not in magic or madness, but in work. In many ways, he is the anti-Serana. Where she is ancient and cursed, he is mortal and ordinary. Where she struggles with immortality, he struggles with legacy. Where others seek redemption or revenge, Rogi seeks recognition. It is precisely because he lacks spectacle that he is forgotten. And yet, that's what makes him seem uniquely real. This obscurity mirrors the social hierarchy of Skyrim itself. The Nords worship warriors and despise weakness. They remember heroes, not miners. They sing songs of his grandma, not of those who dug the stone his fortress was built on. Kynes Grove's miners live under this shadow of cultural neglect. They risk their lives daily, but they are seen as expendable, the silent backbone of the province's wealth and infrastructure. Rogi's lost shield becomes more than a personal heirloom. It's a symbol of the working class forgotten by history. His ancestors were warriors, but now he toils underground. His family's glory has been reduced to labour. His story, like his village, is buried. In that sense, his obscurity is not accidental, it's thematic. Rogi Knotbeard is the embodiment of Skyrim's forgotten backbone. When all is said and done, Rogi Knotbeard stands as the clearest example of one of the most forgotten and neglected followers in all of Skyrim. Not because he is poorly written or designed, but because he represents something profoundly human, the inevitability of being overlooked. His life continues whether you notice him or not. His quest can be ignored forever, and his story will never change. He doesn't shape the world, but the world shapes him. And in doing so, reveals how fragile identity can be in a land built on legend. Rogi Knotbeard is a mirror held up to the player. He asks nothing of you but remembrance. And in a world defined by power, that is a request far too humble for most heroes to hear. When the wind howls through Kynes Grove and the Dragonborn rides past without stopping, Rogi Knotbeard remains, a flickering candle in a frozen world. He doesn't know he's been forgotten. He keeps drinking, working, and telling stories of ancestors no one else remembers. And maybe that's why he lingers in the hearts of those few who do notice him. Because in the end, the measure of a person isn't fame or strength or glory. It's whether their story still matters to someone, even one traveller passing through the snow. His tale is small, but it's real, and in that quiet, human truth lies the essence of Skyrim itself. He may be one of the most forgotten followers in Skyrim, but for those who remember him, he becomes something far greater, a reminder that even the smallest lives leave echoes in the cold. When you first hear about the Bard's College in Solitude, you might imagine a place alive with music. You expect lute strings plucking in harmony, warm laughter echoing through stone halls, and bright-eyed students perfecting the songs that will echo in taverns across the land. And at first glance, the building does fit that image. Beautiful architecture, well-lit interiors, and a proud history. But then you start to notice the silence. The college has no classes, there are no real performances, its halls feel unpopulated, its members strangely static. The people here have names, but few stories. You begin to realise something unsettling. The Bard's College is not the thriving institution you thought it was. In fact, it might be the most irrelevant and overlooked faction in all of Skyrim. And perhaps it always has been. In the Elder Scrolls universe, bards have played an important role. They're not just musicians, they're the keepers of history, the chroniclers of great deeds, and the voices of rebellion when courage is needed the most. The Bard's College in Solitude was once a prestigious institution, located in Skyrim's capital of culture and politics. It should, by all rights, be a centre for artistry. Historically, it attracted talented performers from across Tamriel. But by the time the Dragonborn arrives, this grand legacy feels faded. The college is more of a relic than a living, breathing school. Its members, though charming in their own way, don't seem to be learning or teaching. They're simply there, existing between dusty bookshelves and empty performance stages. The Elder Scrolls lore tells us the college was important once. The game shows us something else entirely. When you approach the Bard's College, the building stands proudly along Solitude's upper district, near the Blue Palace. It's large, stately, and undeniably well kept. You might expect a recruitment process, an audition, or at least a trial. Instead, you're pulled into the college through a favour for the headmaster, a quest involving a lost verse from King Olaf's verse. The initiation is surprisingly anticlimactic. You don't prove yourself as a musician, you don't learn a song, you don't even play an instrument. You simply recover a piece of writing, return it, and watch a festival unfold. And just like that, you're a bard. Except you're not given classes, or lessons, or a role to play. You've joined a faction that doesn't actually do anything. Walk through the Bard's College and you'll meet several named NPCs. They each hold titles suggesting a speciality: drum, flute, lute. You might think this means they can teach you to play, but their lessons are just small skill boosts tied to short fetch quests. After that, they have little to say beyond generic greetings. There's no sense of progression. The college doesn't seem to have schedules, rehearsals, or recitals. The so-called students are nowhere to be found. The entire place feels like a museum display, a snapshot of a once thriving institution frozen in time. Even in a game full of factions with flawed structures, the Bard's College feels particularly hollow. It's as though Bethesda built the framework for a deep role-playing experience and then stopped halfway. The Bard's College questline is perhaps the shortest of any major faction in Skyrim. You start with Tending the Flames, the King Olaf quest. It's an enjoyable little adventure taking you to Dead Man's Respite, where you recover the lost verse. The highlight is seeing the burning of the king at the Solitude Festival, a rare and purely cultural event in Skyrim. But then that's it. The follow-up quests are 3 small radiant jobs from the college staff. Recover a flute, a drum, and a lute from random dungeons. They're forgettable, mechanically identical, and carry no narrative weight. When you finish them, nothing changes in the college. You receive a few gold coins and skill boosts, but no new opportunities, no recognition, no sense that you've advanced as a bard. Compared to the Companions, the Thieves Guild, or the College of Winterhold, the Bard's College doesn't even pretend to offer a storyline. It's not just forgotten by the world, it feels forgotten by its own designers. If you linger in the Bard's College for too long, the quiet becomes oppressive. The halls are spacious and full of light, but they're empty. NPCs wander aimlessly, not interacting with one another. No music plays unless you force it by requesting a performance from a wandering bard in a tavern, not from anyone here in the actual Bard's College. You'd expect this to be a lively counterpoint to Skyrim's many battle-worn halls and dark dungeons. Instead, it feels abandoned in spirit. Even Solitude's tavern, the Winking Skeever, feels more like a bardic hall than the Bard's College itself. The Dragonborn, savior of the world, can become a member of the faction and still find themselves standing alone in a silent room, wondering if anyone in this building even remembers their name. Lore-wise, the Bard's College should be one of the most politically and culturally influential factions in Skyrim. Bards are storytellers, and stories shape public opinion. A good song can spark rebellion, inspire warriors, or preserve a king's legacy. And yet in Skyrim's civil war, a conflict perfectly suited for propaganda, the Bard's College does nothing. No songs are written about the Stormcloaks or the Empire. No travelling performers are seen swaying hearts in taverns. No one even comments on the war unless prompted. This is where the forgotten part of their identity becomes almost tragic. They could have been Skyrim's voice in a time of chaos. Instead, they're a background decoration in the safest, wealthiest city in the province. It's almost cruel to compare the Bard's College to Skyrim's other factions. The Dark Brotherhood is a shadowy family of assassins with a full quest line, a base that changes over time, and characters you grow attached to. The College of Winterhold lets you rise through the ranks, learn magic, and eventually lead the institution. Even the small Blackbriar family in Riften has a more active influence and involvement in the game world. The Bard's College, on the other hand, doesn't evolve. It doesn't respond to your achievements. You're not given a title beyond member. It's not just forgotten by players. It seems to be forgotten by the game itself. Many players go through the entire Skyrim playthrough without ever setting foot in the Bard's College. Part of the reason is its location. Solitude is far to the northwest, often visited late in the game. Another reason is that the college offers no tangible rewards beyond skill boosts in speech and some gold. There's no armor set, no unique weapons, and no followers tied to it. Even the main questline leading there isn't advertised. You won't be naturally pointed towards it unless you happen to overhear the right conversation or stumble upon the headmaster. By the time most players reach Solitude, they're deep in other questlines and see no reason to spend any time on a faction that offers so little. The saddest part about the Bard's College is how much potential it has. Imagine being able to perform in taverns across Skyrim, winning gold and influence based on your speech skill. Imagine helping to write ballads about your adventures, or spreading propaganda for your chosen side in the Civil War. Imagine bards travelling with you, their music changing based on the region you're in. The framework for such a system is here. The NPCs exist, the building exists, and the idea exists. But instead of becoming a hub for player creativity and roleplay, the Bard's College is a hollow shell, a faction that exists in name only. So why bother joining the Bard's College at all? For completionists, it's simply another faction to tick off the list. For roleplayers, it can be a headcanon choice, imagining your Dragonborn's life as a wandering poet. For modders, it's fertile ground to expand upon. And indeed, several mods overhaul the college to give it more quests, performances, and relevance. But in vanilla Skyrim, the college remains a curiosity, a stop on the way to greater things. It's a place you visit once, maybe twice, and then like the rest of the world, you forget it's there. In a world of dragons, assassins, mages, and thieves, the Bard's College is a whisper. It sits in a beautiful hall in Solitude, surrounded by people with titles and instruments, yet no music fills the air. The members are more like caretakers of an empty theatre than active participants in Skyrim's story. They could have been powerful, they could have been relevant, they could have been the voice of the people in a time of war. Instead, they are the most forgotten faction in all of Skyrim, and perhaps somewhere in these quiet walls, they know it. Most cults in Skyrim scream their presence. The Dark Brotherhood carves assassinations into the walls of Skyrim's history. The Vigilance of Stendarr broadcast their mission from every shrine and every ruin. The Daedric princes appear in dreams, in haunted artifacts, and in the mouths of madmen. But then there's the Mythic Dawn, a name once feared across the Empire, a group whose leader slit a god's throat and opened the gates of oblivion. Their history is burned into the towers. Their symbol, rising sun, black and red, is still known to the scholars of Tamriel, and yet in Skyrim they feel forgotten, half alive, an echo of something that once mattered. But even more so now, they're just a whisper in a cave, and the most unnerving part is, they're still waiting. To understand how strange their presence is in Skyrim, you have to remember what they did. The Mythic Dawn wasn't just a cult. They were responsible for the assassination of Uriel Septim VII, the Oblivion Crisis, and the literal destruction of cities. Their Daedric lord walked the mortal world, and yet they were still defeated. Their leader, Markarth, was killed, the gates were sealed, their future vanished. So when Skyrim introduced them again, through books, ruins, and one especially eerie quest, you expect something bigger, more coordinated and more dangerous. But what you find is quieter, smaller. A couple of worshippers in a cave, huddled around a fire, cling to prophecy. It's not ambition anymore, it's desperation. You meet Silas in Dawnstar. He runs a museum, or rather, he wants to. It's called the Mythic Dawn Museum, and it's not well loved. Guards warn you off, citizens avoid him. He's not dangerous, but he's just off. Inside, he shows you relics, robes, books, a Daedric dagger. He's collected everything he could from the ashes of a forgotten cult. He speaks with reverence, but also with something close to loneliness. He's not surrounded by followers, he's surrounded by silence. He's the only one at the museum, at a museum no one visits. Worships for a god who never gave him a voice. This isn't the start of a revolution, it's a man building a shrine to memory. The quest Silas gives you is called Pieces of the Past. Your goal? Recover the 3 parts of Mehrunes' razor, a legendary Daedric weapon shattered after the crisis. This sounds like the beginning of something grand, but each piece you retrieve reveals something unexpected. The first is in the hands of a man who wants nothing to do with the cult. The second belongs to a paranoid noble who doesn't understand what he's holding. The third is guarded by a Hagraven cult who see it as just another tool of power. No one reveres the razor anymore. No one remembers why it mattered. Each step you take confirms the same thing. The Mythic Dawn didn't fade into shadows. They crumbled into irrelevance. Once you gather the pieces, Silas asks you to meet at the shrine, a stone altar hidden in the Mountain of the Pale. This shrine is one of the loneliest places in the game. Wind lashes at you, snow mutes every footstep. There are no pilgrims, no sign of recent life, just frozen stone and a cold promise. And when you arrive, Dagon speaks. For the first time in centuries, the Prince of Destruction addresses a mortal. He asks you to kill Silas, to prove your worth, and to earn the razor's full power. You can choose, but either way, the moment is telling. Dagon doesn't care about the Mythic Dawn anymore. He doesn't thank Silas, he doesn't restore the cult, he only wants blood. And once he gets it, the mountain is silent again. If you choose to spare Silas, the shrine remains lifeless. Dagon falls silent, the razor stays broken. If you kill him, the shrine activates. Demora guardians emerge, you fight, you win, you claim the blade. But there's no fanfare, no new followers, no secret rooms or quests or lore. You're left alone on the mountaintop, razor in hand, a Daedric weapon with no cult behind it. Just a dagger, just a name, and just an echo of fire in a frozen land. The Mythic Dawn does exist elsewhere in Skyrim, but only barely. In books, in journals, in footnotes. You can find the commentaries, you can read his apocalyptic rhetoric, his promises of paradise through destruction, but it doesn't inspire you. It doesn't threaten, it reads like a scripture from a forgotten god. Even the vigilance of Stendar, who monitor Daedric cults, barely mention the Mythic Dawn. Because in a world of vampires, dragons, and cannibals, the Mythic Dawn just don't really matter anymore. Again, there are no Mythic Dawn agents in cities, no new cells forming in caves, no secret notes pointing to a grand design. Compare that to the Dark Brotherhood, who rebuild from ruins. Even minor cults, like the Afflicted, have dungeons, purpose, and identity. But the Mythic Dawn, well, they're not growing, they're not hiding, they're just fading. Even in the Elder Scrolls Online, which takes place before Skyrim, they're presented as broken, desperate zealots clinging to an ideal that even Dagon seems to have abandoned. And that's what makes them so haunting. Not because they're evil, but because they're forgotten evil. The kind that doesn't end with a bang, but just a slow, pitiful ember. So why are they here at all? Why resurrect a cult only to show its decay? Maybe that's the point. The Mythic Dawn isn't here to terrify you. They're here to remind you that some ideologies don't die in fire. They die in failure, in fading purpose, in cold shrines and unvisited museums. Their presence in Skyrim isn't a threat, it's a ghost. And in a game so obsessed with legacy, with prophecy, and with power, the Mythic Dawn might just be the best warning of all, that not every story can get a second chapter. There's something quietly unsettling about how often the Mythic Dawn symbol still shows up in Skyrim, however. You'll find it burned into old banners, engraved in books, worn on amulets that have no magical use, no stats, and just presence. You can't interact with it, can't use it, it's just there. the rising sun over a bloody horizon, a mark of the Fourth Era's most infamous cult, still visible 2 centuries after its fall, almost like a scar that can't even heal. What's disturbing isn't that it remains, it's that no one talks about it. NPCs don't recognise it, guards don't react. Even Silas, who surrounds himself with the remnants of the cult, never truly explains what the symbol means. It's one of the only visual motives in Skyrim that has such a deep history, but zero in-game explanation, no codex, no glossary entry, no loading screen tips. It's just a glyph tied to apocalypse, left hanging in caves and museums as if it's no different than a moth wing or a Dwemer gear. And that silence, well, it's deafening, because it reminds you that some horrors don't end in fire, they fade. They become decoration, forgotten relics of people who once thought they could reshape the world with daggers and dreams, but ultimately couldn't. And now it's just reduced to symbols that just sit there watching and watching over and over again. The razor is one of the strongest weapons in Skyrim. It has a chance to kill instantly, no matter the target. It's powerful, but it's not symbolic anymore. There's no ritual attached to its use, no reputation. It's just a weapon you got from a dead man's obsession. And that's the perfect metaphor for the mythic Dawn in Skyrim, a cult that once shook the world, reduced to a side quest with an optional reward. No purpose, no legacy, just a name, just a relic, and just a whisper in the snow. Skyrim is full of groups trying to be remembered. The Stormcloaks fight for history, the Thieves Guild fight for relevance, the College of Winterhold fights for prestige, but the Mythic Dawn, they're not fighting anymore. They're waiting for Dagon to speak again, for Cameron's paradise to return, for the world to burn, but the world just moved on. And maybe that's the saddest thing of all. Not that they failed, not that they were evil, but that they waited, and no one was watching at all. Skyrim is a land defined by diversity. From the frosted peaks of the Pale to the golden marshes of the Rift, every race of Tamriel finds some foothold in this frozen north. Nords call it home, Imperials claim its roads, Dunmer fill its grey quarters, Khajiit roam its borders, and Argonians labour in its shadows. It is, in many ways, a microcosm of the Empire's reach, a melting pot of peoples drawn together by war, trade, and prophecy. Yet, amid all that life and struggle, there is a peculiar absence. For all of its cities, caves, ruins, and villages, there is one race that simply doesn't exist anymore in Skyrim. A race once so powerful that their disappearance reshaped the continent, and whose echoes still hum beneath the mountains. No other race in Tamriel has vanished so completely. Their cities remain, their machines still stir, and yet not one living soul of their kind walks the earth. Skyrim remembers them not as ancestors, but as ghosts of metal and stone. The Dwemer were not like the Nords or the Dunmer. They were not warriors or mystiques, not farmers or priests. They were engineers, philosophers, and atheists. People whose god was reason itself. They called themselves Dwemer, meaning people of the deep. To the Nords, they were the Deep Elves, an ancient branch of the elven races who sought not divine favour, but divine understanding. Their cities tunnelled into the roots of Skyrim's mountains, vast labyrinths powered by magma and mystery. While other races built in wood and stone, the Dwemer built in brass and steam. Their ruins are filled with whirring machines, pressure valves, and ancient gears that still turn after thousands of years. These mechanical sentients, dwarven automatons, guard the secrets of their makers, long after the makers themselves turn to dust. The irony of the Dwemer's absence is that they are everywhere. Their architecture defines Skyrim's underworld. Their machines patrol its ruins. You can almost feel their presence in every hiss of steam, every echoing clang of metal deep below the earth. And yet, not one of them remains alive to claim it. The Dwemer's disappearance is one of the greatest mysteries not only of Skyrim, but of all Nirn. At the height of their power during the First Era, they were the most advanced civilization in existence. Their cities glowed with light, their knowledge rivaled that of gods, and their understanding of tonal architecture, the use of sound and vibration to shape reality, was unmatched. But in a single unrecorded moment, they vanished. Not killed, not conquered or erased. They were just gone. Every Dwemer across all of Tamriel gone in an instant. The cause of their disappearance centers on one thing: their chief tonal architect, and his work with the heart of Lorcan, the divine organ torn from the god who created the mortal world. He believed he could use the heart to transcend morality itself, to give his people eternal existence without the burden of divine subservience. The result was probably annihilation. In one fatal experiment beneath Red Mountain, the Dwemer simply ceased to exist. Their bodies did not decay, their souls did not ascend. They left no corpses, only armor lying empty on the ground. Only one being survived, Yargrim, a Dwemer engineer who was absent in another realm during the disappearance. When he returned, he found himself utterly alone, the last of his kind. His body began to rot, his mind to falter, and his name became synonymous with extinction. When the Dwemer vanished, the world didn't cheer, it shuddered. Their disappearance left entire economies and ecosystems in chaos. The Nords lost their trading partners. Even the Daedra, it said, took note of the silence. Skyrim's mountains became graveyards. Miners who stumbled upon Dwemer ruins whispered of noises that shouldn't be there. Machines still moving, chambers that breathe, and lights that flickered in rooms that should have been dead. The Dwemer were gone, but their world refused to stop functioning. Perhaps that's what makes their absence so chilling. Death in Skyrim is common. You can meet ghosts, Draga, or necromancers who cheat it daily. But the Dwemer didn't die. They simply stopped existing, leaving behind a world that continues to function as though waiting for their return. Every gear that turns in their ruins is a heartbeat with no body. Every glowing crystal is a memory with no mind. If the Dwemer are gone, why do their creations still walk? The dwarven automatons are the last moving fragments of a vanished civilization. These machines defend the ruins tirelessly, programmed to attack anything that disturbs their halls. Some scholars believe the automatons are powered by magical cores or soul gems, but others whisper that the Dwemer themselves became these machines. That Cagrenae's great experiment didn't destroy them, it transformed them. This theory suggests that the Dwemer didn't die. They exist within these machines, their consciousness distributed through the humming veins of their cities. Every centurion is a fragment of a collected soul, a mechanical echo of godless people. It's an idea both beautiful and terrifying, a race that sought immortality and found it in metal and fire, condemned to wander their halls forever as hollow echoes of their former selves. When the Dragonborn descends into a Dwemer ruin, it's not just exploration, it's intrusion. You're walking through a graveyard that still breathes. The Dwemer's faith, or lack thereof, was their defining trait. They rejected gods, Daedra and Aedra alike, believing that divinity was an illusion born of mortal ignorance. To them, the gods were not omnipotent beings, but powerful entities bound by the same rules of reality as mortals. Through study and reason, they believed these mortals could ascend to the same level or surpass it entirely. It was this ambition that led Cagrenae to the heart of Lorcan. The Dwemer wanted not to serve the divine, but to become divine on their own terms. Their philosophy was cold, precise, and merciless. Where the Nords had myth and mead, the Dwemer had logic and mathematics. Their temples were not houses of worship, but laboratories. Their priests were not prophets, but scientists. It's a vision of the world utterly devoid of comfort, no gods, no afterlife, only the endless pursuit of knowledge. Perhaps in their arrogance they found what they sought, a form of transcendence beyond mortal comprehension. Or perhaps they simply made themselves nothing at all. So why call the Dwemer the race that doesn't exist? Because they are both gone and present. Their absence is visible, their influence is tangible. They are the ghosts of progress, haunting Skyrim's mountains with the hum of their forgotten machines. Every adventurer who delves into a Dwemer ruin feels it, the sense that something is watching, measuring, and calculating. The ruins feel alive because in some strange way, they are. No other race in Skyrim evokes that same paradox. The Nords dominate its surface, the Dunmer thrive in exile, the Argonians endure in bondage. But only the Dwemer exist as both memory and mechanism. They are proof that power leaves traces long after life is gone. In the end, the Dwemer's absence is not a tragedy, it's a warning. Their cities still hum, their constructions still kill, their brilliance still blinds. But no laughter echoes through those halls, no warmth glows from their forges. The Dwemer proved that gods can be denied, but they also proved that in doing so, one risks becoming less than mortal. They sought eternity and found oblivion. And in Skyrim, where every race struggles to survive the cold, perhaps the greatest miracle is not immortality, but simply still being here. Because beneath the snow and stone, the Dwemer wait, not as ghosts, but as a memory the world refuses to let die. The only race that doesn't exist in all of Skyrim, because they were too clever to live. What makes a place truly forgotten in Skyrim isn't whether it's hidden on the map or difficult to reach. It's whether the world and the player eventually stop thinking about it. Some of these places are incredibly detailed. They have unique atmospheres, strong lore, memorable designs, even entire stories attached to them. But Skyrim is such a massive game, constantly pulling your attention towards big cities, larger quests, and more dramatic moments, that certain locations slowly fade into the background, no matter how interesting they actually are. And over time, that fading becomes part of their identity. These places start to feel disconnected from the rest of the world, not abandoned completely, but overlooked, existing quietly at the edges of the game while everything else keeps moving forward. That's what makes revisiting them so interesting. Because when you go back after hours away, you suddenly notice how much atmosphere was always there. The isolation, the strange details, the feeling that these locations have been sitting untouched, while the rest of Skyrim carried on without them. And in a weird way, that can make them feel more real than some of the major cities. Because forgotten places don't feel designed around the player. They feel like parts of the world that simply kept existing, whether anyone noticed them or not. And that's why they stick with you once you finally revisit them. Not because they're the biggest or most important places in Skyrim, but because they feel like lost pieces of the world, quietly buried beneath everything else the game wants you to remember.